Very special guest today, ladies and gentlemen. We have hospice nurse Penny. I mean, if you're in the realm of death, like we all are at the Mortuary Show, you gotta follow her. You know what she's doing. A little bit of a different aspect for those of you who don't know her. A lot of times we're talking more on the post-death side of things. Today with Penny, we have the hospice side of things. She's got a plethora of knowledge, makes some really both entertaining content and knowledgeable, also mixes in some comedy and some funness and some social awareness type of things, I would like to say. So Penny, thank you so much for taking the time. You're a big deal in our lives. How are you?
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I'd like to first know, hit you with a little bit of a hardest hitting question. What is the one thing about being a hospice nurse over your career that would be the most challenging? And you don't really have to hold back because you got a lot of funeral directors listening. So if there's any side of that stuff, you don't have to
Oh,
be.
so I can talk about the challenges from the funeral directors?
I'm sure you have nothing but
I,
complaints.
no, I mean, I would say, as far as that goes, I have mostly had wonderful interactions with funeral directors. I can think of one negative one. Other than that, everybody has always been professional and kind and wonderful. As far as the
That's what
most
we love to hear.
challenging aspect of being a hospice nurse, I would say that has to do with family dynamics,
Mhm,
dealing with people who are in grief, who
mhm.
are in denial. We don't like to use that word, but it is what it is.
Yep.
Um, Dealing with family drama. You know, we go into situations where this discord has been around forever, and we
Right.
recognize that there's nothing we can do about it. We can't change it, so we have to, work with them
Yeah.
and try to get through it all together. And sometimes that is hard.
It always seems to kind of bubble up, in these times of sort of crisis or end of life when all the family is around. And we know that all too well, being just in that space. And it is so hard because you're trying to do our jobs of providing the best care or providing the best post care or service, whatever that might be. And it makes it really challenging when you have people that will pretty much disagree for the sake of disagreeing with each other
Mm,
because they're at odds. So
hmm
it's got to be such a challenge, especially at those moments when big decisions are being made, I'd imagine.
Absolutely, yes. Especially, for hospice patients, they can still maintain a full code status if they want to. And so that is often where a challenging situations come up. Another one is giving medication, morphine, especially at the end of life. There's a lot of hate and discontent when, like you say, they want to argue for the sake of arguing. That's a really good one for them to pick on.
Right.
Um, and we also recognize that part of what's driving that isn't just their history of those dynamics, but you're compounding that with the grief experience too.
Right.
Anticipatory grief for
Yep.
us, for you, probably post-death grief. We have the more upstream version, which is they know what's coming, and that's causing them to have a whole lot of grief around that. And so people just
Yeah.
act a fool when that's going on.
Yeah. It's so true. It's got to be that buildup and that tension, and it makes it so hard. And when you have families that are at odds, it's just there's nothing you can really do but stay out of the way. Do you remember any specific stories that you had a family that was actually difficult, and what were some of the crazy things that happened, and what was the outcome?
Yeah, I've had lots, but one in particular, the son lived with his mom, and he was very much not getting what was happening with her. He was trying to get her up all the time. And she fell because she just couldn't walk, and he was pushing her to try to do things. And he wouldn't medicate her. She was in so much pain. He wasn't turning her frequently. She got a bed sore. It
Oh,
was really awful. I had to get his siblings involved, and they actually went to court and got guardian ad litemship over her and kicked him out of the house, and then moved her into a nursing home. And then he continued to come to the nursing home and get in the way of the staff, not letting them manage her symptoms, not letting them give medication.
Yeah.
He became unwelcome at the nursing home. They said he
Okay.
couldn't come see her anymore. She was actively dying, and she was very much lingering, probably because she didn't have her son with her, because no matter how he was with her, she was still his mom, he was still her son. And that dynamic in that relationship had been created through their interaction, their whole lives. I believe he was the youngest child in the family. So I ended up, wanted to go see her. Staff said no. They called security, kicked him out. And I went out to talk to him, and he was in tears. He said, I just want to be with my mom. And I said, listen, you're not going to be able to be with her if you can't get it together. You
Yeah.
cannot get in the way of the staff. They need to medicate her. She's suffering without that
Right.
medication. And he,
Right.
promised that he would behave. He agreed to allow the staff to do their job. And he came in and he was able to sit with her until she died. So it turned out, it was a good outcome.
Yeah.
But it
And
was a very, very challenging situation.
yeah. And it's got to be so hard too, because he just wanted to be there for her, and he just wasn't comprehending that what he was doing was not only not helping, it was hurting her situation.
Right, right. He was trying to be helpful, but he was being hurtful instead. He didn't want to lose his mom. I mean, it's hard to fault people when you know that their intent is coming from a place of love, but
Right.
then you also have situations where it's driven by greed,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
and I've had that
Trust
happen
me. Oh
too.
yeah.
I had a patient who was, we thought, dying, and her daughter had a mental illness, and we found out that she was over medicating her with a benzodiazepine. And her mom ended up, after we figured this out, and her sister got her out of the house, and she was banned from the building where her mom lived. She was not allowed to be in there anymore. Her mom actually really perked up and lived for another year on hospice.
Wow.
Yeah, we thought she was dying, and I kept being like, something's not right. I was keeping track
Right.
of the medications, and
Yeah.
she's really getting a lot of lorazepam. That's not right. Something's not right here. And sure enough, her daughter was over medicating her.
Man, it's crazy what you'll see people do, especially from that financial side of things. And I've seen it before myself, where a family as disgusting as this is to say, a family's trying to take advantage of losing a loved one. And
Hmm.
I've seen it firsthand where people are asking for autopsies in situations that have absolutely no need for an autopsy, like someone would be like in your care, Penny, where they were in hospice for several months or 6 months, and they passed away. They were at the end for quite some time and still asking for a private autopsy. And I'm just like, this is not adding up. And you see things, or people ask for example, you mentioned the bed sore, and like a family asked in this situation to take pictures of the bed sore, and I'm like, this is just not a situation. What someone is trying to do, and it really makes you a bit sick in those situations when people are trying to take advantage of their poor loved one that's gone the other way. And you try to stay out of the middle of these things, but you see it, and it does happen. So you just got to do what you think is best, in my opinion, because there's no really right or wrong way to do it, because you're just kind of stuck in the middle.
Yeah, well, you can shut them down on the autopsy thing pretty quickly by letting them
Yeah.
know they're going to have to pay for it. They
Right.
don't they don't want to do that. But another thing I've seen, and I don't know if you've had people that have requested that you change the date on a death certificate, but like when you have
Oh.
a failure to launch adult who's living with the person who's dying, and the person who's dying is getting Social Security, and if
uh
they die at any time
Get it
during the
together.
month, they
Yeah.
don't get paid. And so they
Uh-huh.
wait until after to report the death.
Ooh,
So
that's
in
heaven.
some places they can't, well, actually, I guess they could do that where death is pronounced. In my state, we don't pronounce death. The family just tells us when the person died.
Oh,
But
okay.
they can definitely hesitate on that phone call. or they try
Yeah.
to keep them alive longer. You know, they're
Yeah.
by doing things that are actually harmful and going to probably end their life quicker, you know,
Right.
by trying to feed them, by trying to give them water, requesting IV fluids, these types of things that they think are going to help that person live and through the end of the month. Really,
Oh,
actually, they're doing more harm and could potentially cause them to die faster by doing those things.
geez, I believe it though. I can see it. It's just wild stuff that you see. I guess on that subject of both these things, I suppose when you're seeing someone, I guess like from our point of view, when someone has a bed sore, what are some of the things that you are proactively doing to like prevent those? Because that's got to be so hard when someone's there for such an extended period of time, because it's just a natural thing that's happened in a tough situation.
Hmm.
And when we see it, it's obviously it's sad, and it's a pretty tough, gruesome thing that I don't think people realize. Like for me personally, that is in the top five of things that I don't like dealing with. That's one of them. So, what are some of those things that you have to do? Because I'm sure it's not pleasant for you all either as hospice,
Yeah. So, first of all, most people on hospice die in their own home, so their family or their caregivers.
right?
And we educate around repositioning them because that is kind of the
Number
primary
one,
way to prevent skin breakdown is to reposition. Then there comes a point where we know that repositioning is more challenging and the skin is going to break down. The
yeah,
skin is an organ. It's the largest organ in our body, and the organs are failing when a person is dying. So sometimes we have patients that get wounds that are called Kennedy ulcers, and they are so bad that they can just, it's like the skin is melting. You can see the bone, you can see the nerves, you can see the muscle. It's
yeah.
really, really horrible. They smell horrible.
The
And
smell is horrific.
right.
Yeah,
And in those cases, all we are doing is medicating the person for comfort.
right.
Certainly when we see somebody developing a bed sore, we are going to try to prevent it from getting worse.
Worse.
We
Yeah,
do not try
yep,
to cure it. We don't use wound vacs. We do whatever we can to try to prevent it from getting worse. We try to prevent it from being painful, and we try to prevent it from smelling bad because it is very off-putting, the
right.
smell, right? I'm sure you know.
I do.
But we also really educate a lot about, keep them off that part of their body if you can,
Yep.
but also understand that those wounds are not necessarily a sign of neglect in a hospice
Right.
patient
Mhm.
because they aren't getting nutrition that's going to help prevent that or heal that.
Yep.
And again, their skin it's dying, their body is dying, their skin is dying. And when people are in bed for any extended period of time, even a healthy person in the hospital can start to show a little bit of pressure ulcers, or pressure
Right.
breakdown,
Yeah.
within a couple of hours. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good to know. That's helpful information for us to understand. I think more people should realize that too, because it just makes me think about like a family or two that have said, they're claiming neglect. I'm like, I'm sure that's not the case, and it's just those situations that rub me really the wrong way, I suppose. Have you ever been involved, like, or know anyone that was involved in a lawsuit of that regard, where a family's trying to, I like to say, take their anger out on someone else by displacing it in that way? Have you ever been involved at all?
No, not any lawsuits. Definitely seen complaints, especially in my current position in quality, where
Right.
people will complain.
Yeah.
Sometimes people will complain and their complaint is valid. They didn't get the care that they were hoping to get. Many times it's a person that was in a nursing home and they're kind of blaming hospice for what happened with their person, even though it wasn't us that had anything to do with it. It was the
Right.
caregivers at the nursing home. And
Yeah.
sometimes people will complain and what they're talking about is something that's really normal. And that's why I am on social media
Right.
normalizing death and dying,
Mhm.
because I've seen people, for example, we got a letter from somebody, like a 3-page letter, from the daughter of a patient who died on our service. And she
Yeah.
was saying that her mom died a horrible death. She was suffering, and she said, just look at this picture. And she sent a picture. And so myself and the leaders who are reviewing this letter are looking at the picture and we're like, that's a normal dying person. That's
Yeah.
what they look like when they're dying.
Right.
There's nothing unusual about that. So a lot of times people think that there's something really wrong with
Yeah.
their person because they don't know what to expect when a person's dying. They
Right.
don't know that they're going to look different. They don't know that there's going to be sounds and sometimes smells and,
Yeah.
all these things they don't know. Breathing changes and the death rattle and eyes are open and change color and, all these things that they don't know are going to happen. And so, when we're able to say, oh, that's normal, especially the breathing changes are something that really concern people. My mom was gasping at the end of life. She was suffocating to death. No, actually, that breathing pattern at the end of life is almost like an autonomic thing. They're just
Yeah.
doing it. They're not moving air. They're really on their way out. They're not
Yeah.
suffering at all. It's normal. It's a normal dying process.
Yeah. That's great that you're doing that. Just bringing some normalcy to it and more understanding. And I think it's a great thing that you're doing that because it's just helpful for people to understand it, and it just will make more sense when you're going through a hard enough time. At least some people will have more awareness of what to expect in those situations. That's a lot of why I do the podcast and social media as well, is to for people to understand the level of work and dedication that it takes behind the scenes that isn't really noticed. And I'm sure it's the exact same thing with you. There is so much that goes into what we do, and everything that we do is to try to help these people and these families. And I love that social media has been a way that we've been able to do that and bring a lot of light to places that were very in the dark and people were not understanding and curious about. What made you first start, I guess, making the content, and what was the point where it's like, whoa, this is like actually a thing now?
I've always been I've been a hospice nurse for almost 20 years, and I've always been just a passionate advocate for hospice and educating about death and dying and normalizing it. It's always been something that since I became a hospice nurse, I've been really passionate about. During COVID, I found my way to TikTok.
That's
And
exactly what happened with me. Yeah.
yeah, trying to learn how to shuffle dance, never did. Uh, Making a few of the little fun trend videos. I'm 62. At the time I was 59, so like not really in the generation of TikTokers, right? So my videos went nowhere. But one day I told a story about a hospice patient and it went viral. And I realized, oh, wow, I have a platform that I can educate people
Yeah.
on. Like this is I can actually do this like at a grassroots level. I can help people.
Yeah.
And that's it just took off. I got like 10,000 followers overnight. I went, "Oh shit.
What is
Better
that?
tell my employer about this, better tell my husband about this." I
Yeah.
went to work. It was a weekend this all happened. On Monday I notified our risk department and I said, I'm on social media and I am following our policy. I'm not doing anything against our policy. I'm not telling any information about our patients. And they said, well,
Nothing
let's look at it. Let's take a look at it. So they checked it out and they were like, oh, this is great. We love it. You're fine. No problem.
Nice.
So, and from there, I just kept going on.
Wow. I mean, it's so cool that like anyone could do it now, and everyone has the ability to learn from people that are actually involved on the day-to-day things, which is so beautiful in its own way. How do you come up with all the content that you still, because you post like crazy still, and I know how much effort it takes because I myself have slowed down on the amount compared to what I was a couple of years ago. So how do you still keep that passion alive, and where are you finding the content as well?
So I've slowed down too. Like when I started for the first probably 2 years, 3 years probably, three times a day I was posting videos 3 times a day.
Wow,
And
that's a lot.
now I don't even post every day, but I do post reruns sometimes if things
Yeah.
were really helpful. I look to my comment section a lot. I get questions in my comment section. There are certain topics that never get old.
Yeah.
So I readdress things often because you know how the algorithm works on all the social media platforms. Not everybody sees all your videos. And so I'm able to reach more and more people with the same topic.
Mhm.
And I just really, I get a lot of inspiration from my work still, because I do participate in meetings where we're discussing complex patients. And
Right.
I know a lot from the quality and regulatory standpoint of hospice. So I post about things like that. And then I do watch a lot of the trends. And I always think about how can I make that relatable to
Right.
hospice care or death and dying. And those are pretty much what I think a lot of people come for. The majority of my content is trends and me answering questions that people leave me in the
Yeah.
comment section. I do story times. I do just straight education. I call it straight education. But really, I'm kind of more known for the funny, dark humor,
Yeah.
lightening it up, because I always say death is a dark topic. We need to lighten it up. I
Yeah.
think sometimes it's easier for people to um, digest a little amount of information,
Mhm.
and it can be helpful too. I mean, you can actually educate somebody in an 8-second video. I've done that. When I first started out, I made a video to a trending sound that was a song that said, "It's just water. It's
Mm.
just water. It's just water." And
Yeah.
the captions on the video were, "If your person isn't drinking anymore, that's normal." Something along those lines. They aren't going to die of dehydration. They're going to die from their disease.
Sure.
And it went viral, and I had a person in my comment section tell me um, that I had relieved the guilt they had for 15 years over not um,
Wow.
doing IV fluids for her dying dad. And I was
That's
like, wow, that was
beautiful.
an 8-second video.
Yeah.
And, it's like, oh, I have something here. I can actually, you know, make a short little clip about something and people get it. And sometimes they don't get it.
Right.
And so one thing that I started doing a while back, and I haven't really continued it, and I should, but I'd make a clip, a short clip, and then I would add on to that the education piece where I'm actually talking.
Oh, yeah.
So I might do something about that's kind of funny around the death rattle, and then at the end of the video, because TikTok, I know if you've been on TikTok since 2020, it's really
It's
improved
changed
in a
a
lot
lot.
of ways. And you can do longer videos and you can
All about
combine
that. Yeah.
music and that stuff. So then I'll do something like that. But most of the time, even though the videos can be really nuanced, a lot of people get it. They get it.
Yeah.
And then if
Yeah.
they don't, they ask me questions and then I answer their questions.
There you go. And then you're getting more traction in that way, so that works out. That's
Hmm.
beautiful.
Yeah.
How do you like the difference between more of boots on the ground, hospice nurse now being more on the quality side and of things? What's the biggest difference between the two? And I guess how do you like, kind of not being in the thick of it as much as you used to be?
Well, I miss patient care, and I do actually, even though I'm retiring from my current position, do want to go back to working per diem doing patient care. I live
Yeah.
in a very rural area. There's like a population of 86 in the town where I live. And so I've always thought I'd love to be able to just drive around and see patients. So I'm thinking about doing that. When I first came out of the field, I was really ready for it. Not because I was tired of the work. I loved working with patients, even though the family dynamics were probably the hardest thing to deal with. But I
Hmm.
commuted. I lived in Seattle area and it was a lot of traffic. I was sitting in traffic for hours a day. And being a hospice nurse, you recognize that life is short. You don't want to waste any of it sitting in traffic.
The fact.
So this position came available and I thought, okay, I'll do this. And it was very rewarding for me for several years. I have always been the type of person that if I'm going to do a job, I want to learn everything about it. So I knew everything from the patient care side. I worked in hospice care centers. I worked as a case manager doing home hospice. I wanted to learn more about the regulatory side. And so going into the quality position and learning the regulatory stuff, so now I'm an expert in
Yeah.
that type of thing. Um, but then I started really feeling disconnected And by the way, I used to have death anxiety when I was younger. And when I went into hospice, I stopped having that death anxiety. And that
Yeah.
started creeping back for me. I felt not so connected to death anymore. But when I
Yeah.
found my way to social media and started actually connecting with people through social media and helping in that way and educating in that way, it really it kind of sparked something in me, like it helped me feel connected again.
Yeah.
And so it's been very rewarding to be on the social media aspect of educating. I feel really connected to the people who follow me. I feel like I have a community,
Yeah.
and I really love being able to help people in that way. So um, I still kind of wish I was doing the work, and I've had opportunities in my personal life to help people still. Um, and I do see myself like eventually going back to doing some kind of patient care here and there per diem, like not full time, but
Yeah.
just once in a while.
The full circle thing.
Hmm.
I think it's so true that when you're around death, it gives you a completely different perspective on just life in general and taking advantage of the little moments and just embracing just every day. And I think it's very valuable to have that experience, and people that don't, because 99.9% of the world don't have that daily experience around it, to either maybe follow someone like you, or at least entertain the idea and think about it rather than just kind of burying it down. And you know I think that's when the death anxiety like creeps up, is when you try to avoid it so much, or
Absolutely.
it's like let it just be. And I think you just have a way better appreciation of life in general.
Absolutely. People ask me, how do you I was doing a TikTok live yesterday and somebody was like, I have death anxiety. What do I do? And I said, you really need to just accept the fact that you're going to die, because when you can get to a place of acceptance, you just take all the power out of it. You can be like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's going to happen. I can move on and focus on my life and living.
Yeah.
And I really think that acceptance starts with being willing to get in the conversation and talk about it, acknowledge it,
Yep.
educate yourself about what to expect,
Mhm.
prepare for it. Legacy work. I say legacy work is great, because if you kind of in the back of your mind are thinking, I'm going to go through my pictures because someday I don't want people to see these pictures after I'm dead, or that type of thing. I feel like getting to that place of acceptance is the key
Yeah.
to getting over death anxiety. It really is.
Yeah. It's not an easy thing to do, but once you do it, I think it frees you up a little bit. That's for sure. So when you were more, of inpatient care, were you in hospice centers, or were you more at home? It seems like more so, or
I did
you
both.
had
I
both?
actually I worked longer in hospice care centers than I did doing home hospice. It's how I
What do you like
started.
the difference, I guess? What are the biggest things for you? Which one did you prefer, I
Yeah.
suppose?
So a hospice care center primarily is for hospice patients who have symptom management needs that cannot be managed in the home.
Got
So
it.
they need skilled nursing, they need medications around the clock. They cannot be managed at home. It has nothing to do with personal care or caregiving. That's completely different. This is skilled, so they need nurses.
Yep.
And so people who are close to the end of their life will often have an exacerbation of symptoms from their disease. So they'll have more pain, they'll have more breathing issues, they'll have more nausea and vomiting, agitation. Terminal agitation is common.
Right.
And so when they come to the care center, the intent is for them to get their symptoms managed and go back home. But because they're close to the end of their life, oftentimes by the time we get their symptoms managed, they're actively dying and they die in the care center. So I say being in the hospice care center is like in your face at the bedside, death and dying. Very, very intense. Lots of deaths in a day. You could have 3, 4, or 5 deaths in a day, in one
Jeez.
shift. Um, Home hospice, I did case management. There are different nursing positions within home hospice. There are nurses that go float. We call them float nurses. They go out and see the patient when needed for after hours. Admit nurses who do the admission to hospice. Case management is the person who's like in charge of the team, and the team is going to be a hospice aide, a social worker, a chaplain.
Mhm.
And you are going to the person's home, and we still do skilled procedures. We put in catheters, we access ports, we program pumps, we give medication if we're there and they need it. But
Mhm.
primarily, we are educating the family on how to provide the care for the person.
Okay.
We don't do 24/7 care. We are just going there and teaching them how to take care of the person. And in the beginning, if the person is kind of further upstream, we may be going once a week, once every 2 weeks. As the
Right.
person starts to decline and we're needed more because things are changing fast, we may start going a few times a week to every single day to make sure that we're supporting that person. So I actually well, when I worked in the hospice care center, I thought, I never want to do anything else. This is what I want to do forever. I just always want to do this.
Mhm.
Um, and then I was recruited by an agency to be a case manager. And the hospice agency that I was working for, which was the second hospice house I went to, was starting to have some problems, serious problems. In fact, they no longer exist. They were it was not a good situation, and I could see the handwriting on the wall, and I thought, I better get out of here while the getting's good.
Yeah.
And so this other agency, they recruited me, and I went to work, and I thought, I'm not going to like case management as much as being in the care center, but I actually did like it.
Oh,
um, One thing I say about being a home hospice nurse is it's like a box of chocolates. Going
yeah.
into someone's house, you never know what you're going to get.
I'm
So you might be going in a beautiful mansion, or you might be going in a van down by the river. You're just
yeah.
going wherever that person calls home. So
Right.
it has its challenges. Um, I think I, I don't know. I can't really say which I like better. I
Yeah.
liked it all. I guess I would have to lean towards the hospice care center
Sure.
because of the commute factor. I think the worst part of home hospice is the driving.
Running around, I'm sure.
Lots of driving involved.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like the same way. Like back when I used to do more transfers running around, it was like I'm spending half my day in the car. But then you kind of get used to it. It's like, oh, I'm listening to a podcast or audiobooks and this and that. And then it's like, or I'd rather be like in the home or in the hospice unit. So it's got one of those where I don't really know which is better.
Right. And to be fair, I now say I would like to drive around and see patients
Right.
because there's no traffic. I mean, if there's a traffic jam, it's a cow in the road. Like there's just no traffic here. And so I think that's, being in the Seattle area and some of the worst traffic in the US, that was just awful. But like you say, you can drive around, listen to a podcast, listen to an audiobook, see beautiful scenery if you're in an area like I'm at, that would be fine. But to literally be sitting stuck in traffic to where it was actually impacting my health. I got piriformis syndrome from sitting in my car for so long.
Jeez.
That was not fun.
No, that does not sound too fun.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask you, so you've mentioned death rattle a couple times, which our funeral directors are aware. Has a family ever been around to hear that? And have you ever had an experience where they just were like, "What is going on right now?"
Yeah, they're always around. I mean, and it
Yeah,
happens very frequently. So, first of all, the death rattle is caused because a person who's dying can no longer swallow and they're not swallowing their secretions. And those secretions build up in the airway, and then the air moves over it when they breathe, and it makes a gurgling or a rattling noise.
yeah.
So, first of all, it's called the death rattle, which is not a great name, but the
No,
other name for it is terminal secretions, and that's not great either.
I'll pass on both.
But it's highly predictive of death. I want to say somewhere around 80% of people who develop a death rattle will die within 48 hours.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's
So it is one of the most troubling things that a family experiences. They have such a hard time with that noise. It's very loud. It can be like a washing machine if the person's been hydrated in the hospital. It can be really bad.
geez.
And we educate, and it's just like they can't get away from that noise. It haunts them. It's horrible. We have medications we can give to try to dry it out, but they don't work. None of them have ever. we've changed from scopolamine patches to glycopyrrolate to atropine drops to hascamine. Like nothing ever really works very well, and it dries the person's mouth out. So it's like it doesn't work that great, and it dries their mouth out.
Yeah.
Repositioning helps. I think repositioning is probably the easiest way to control it.
Sure.
But yeah, it's really hard for families to hear that noise. I've had one person in my whole thousands of patients that I've taken care of who told me that it didn't bother her. I actually walked into the room at the care center and heard the patient was rattling and said,
Yeah.
"Oh, she's got a little rattle going on. That's really normal. You know, that people blah blah." Launch into my explanation. It's just a noise. And she goes, "Oh, it doesn't bother me at all. I feel like she's trying to communicate with me." And so I was like, "Well, that's a sweet way to
Yeah,
reframe
whatever.
that." But
Yeah.
people don't like that noise. It really
No.
bothers them a lot. They're afraid that the person is going to drown in those secretions.
Right.
That's
Right.
their fear.
Yeah.
And we tell them no, they're not. They are not going to drown in those secretions at all. It's not going to cause them to drown. But still, it bothers them so much.
Yeah. It's a tough noise. There's no doubt about that.
Hmm.
So I know you're pretty vocal on, trying to help make, your patients feel peaceful at the end, whether it's through medication or whatever else. I'd love to hear your perspective on that, and um, you know, what percent of families are usually with you on that side, or how often are you recommending, or is that something that comes from higher up, or does it come directly from the family? Like, how does that work? Putting a loved one more at peace when they're close to the end there.
Well, most people are able to be educated, if they're not already, about the fact
Right.
that we don't give drugs to hasten death. That doesn't go with our philosophy. We don't prolong life, nor do we hasten death. That's a
Yep.
hospice philosophy in a nutshell.
Mhm.
Most people are able to be really educated on that. But there are a few who don't want us to medicate. And typically, what I will do with those people is once I give them the spiel of this is a safe dose, we start people at usually about 5 milligrams of morphine. 5 milligrams of morphine is less powerful than a Percocet tablet because
Okay.
oxycodone is like 7.5 milligrams equivalent to 5 milligrams of morphine. So
Okay.
so we are giving them less than they would get if they take a Percocet. And a lot of people can really wrap their head around that. Or it's
Yeah.
about the same as a Vicodin. And then they'll be like, oh, okay. Like
Yeah.
morphine has a very bad stigma for
It
some
does.
reason.
Yeah.
A
Mhm.
lot of times it's because we use a lot of morphine in hospice. It's cheap.
Right.
It's the gold
Yeah.
standard. It works the best for shortness of breath. It works great for pain. And so we use it a lot. And people associate the death of their person with
Yeah.
getting morphine,
For sure.
to the point where people will actually say, I know they gave the morphine to end her life and I'm okay with that. And even when they say I'm okay with that, it's like, no, that's
You
not
shouldn't leave in there.
that's not what ended their life. They died from their disease. They died from their cancer. They died from their heart disease, their lung disease, whatever. That's what ended their life. The amount of drug that we're giving is not enough to end somebody's life.
Right.
People don't realize that there are many, many humans out functioning in society that are on chronic opioids for chronic pain. My cousin was
Yeah.
injured when he was a crane operator.
Mhm.
He was in a very, very bad crane accident, and he was on morphine, long-acting morphine for decades.
Gee.
Decades. You know,
Wow.
we don't just start grandma off with a huge blast of morphine. We start
Right.
really small and we adjust the dose as needed when they are becoming more tolerant to it.
Yeah.
And addiction is another concern. People are concerned with addiction, and we
Sure.
let them know that, we are giving the medication for its intended purpose. We are treating symptoms. That's what it's for. This isn't
Yeah.
party time. We're not trying to get them high.
Right.
And they don't have time to get addicted to it.
Yeah. When
It's
you're
just
that
not
close, right?
important anymore because they're going to die.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a good perspective to give, and I'm glad that you're able to articulate that to most families, and they can understand, what's actually going on. That's got to be helpful. My last question for you: I'd love to know what happened with that funeral director that one time that you had an issue.
I kind of knew you were going to circle back to that one.
I was waiting. I was like, I got to save that for my last one.
I was working at a hospice care center, and our patient was dying, and the family knew it, and they were okay with it. They didn't feel like they needed to be with the person when she was dying. And sometimes patients will wait for people to leave.
For sure. Yeah.
But they left a pair of folded up pajamas in the room. And when we called, it was in the evening, probably around 6 o'clock. We called to let them know that she had died. Actually, it was earlier than that. I'm thinking it was in the afternoon because I
Yeah.
worked until 7 p.m. But anyway, and that's relevant. I'll tell you why in a minute. So
Okay.
she died, and we called the family and said she died. And they said, "Oh, can you ask the funeral home to put her pajamas on her?"
Hmm.
Those were her favorite pajamas. And she had been in a hospital gown. We said, "Yeah, sure, we can do that." So we called the guy, and he came pretty late, close to the end of our shift. So it was hours after she died. And we
Mm.
said, "Oh, there's some pajamas they left on the chair in there. The family asked that she be dressed." And he said, "Well, that's going to cost him an extra $100."
Oh my
And
God.
so my nurse that I was working with, who was kind of the senior nurse, was like, "You know what? We'll just do it ourselves." And
Good for
so
you.
we
Yeah.
went in there, and she was already in rigor mortis. And so
Sure.
we had to put it was not easy. I
A little bit of
feel
effort.
for you. I got a taste of what it's like to be a,
Oh yeah.
funeral director.
Yeah.
um, and so we dressed her, and that was really literally the only bad experience I've ever had,
I'm
ever. And I
happy to hear
had a
it.
lot of experiences because when
Sure.
we do home hospice, we're not usually there when the funeral home comes.
Right.
We are not usually there. We are there at the care center when they come. So
Yeah.
because I worked for so many years in the care center, I had lots of experience with. I used to collect funeral home pens. What a great
A great
party
assortment.
conversation starter that is to have funeral home pens. I had all
Right.
kinds of them.
Uh,
But they would bring us treats, of course, and all that kind of stuff. So
sure.
no, I've always had great interactions with everybody except that one dude who was just like, "I'm gonna charge you $100."
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
wasn't even like,
What a
I mean,
jerk.
if he could have said, "We can, but we're gonna have to let the family know that we're
Yeah.
gonna I'll take the
There's
pajamas
a
with
better way to do
me. I
it.
gotta call him and let him know that we're," or he could have just said, "Okay," and then he could have taken him with him and then called the family and worked it out with them. But
Right.
his attitude was just like, "Well, it's gonna cost him $100." We're
Uh,
like, "Oh, okay, whoa,
yeah. No kidding.
we'll do
I'm
it for
happy that
free."
that wasn't too much of your experience, because that would be unfortunate. I'm glad
No, no.
you're doing
I
one.
think the biggest complaint that we get about funeral homes is how long it takes for them to pick them up. And in a way, that's kind of on us for not setting an expectation with them.
Mhm.
That, and we try to let them know that
What do you
sometimes
usually say, I guess, for timing? Because I'd be interested to know, because I normally know what I would say to a family. So I'd
I,
be interested to see if it's
I always would tell them that the funeral home will call and let you know when they're going to be here, but it is the weekend, it's the middle of the night, it's whenever. It
Mhm.
Traffic is bad this time of the day. It may take a little while. So just so you're prepared. And also really trying to, and I teach about this a lot on my social media, really trying to educate people about the fact that death is not an emergency,
Yeah. Ooh,
because they
yeah.
also get upset when our nurses don't make it out there right away. And like I said,
Right.
we are not required to pronounce death in my state.
Yeah,
Um,
it's
so
here,
we
right?
offer a time of death visit. But if it's after hours, it's possible it may be 3 hours. And I've seen complaints, because that's part of my job, is to review
Yeah.
complaints.
Yeah.
And I've seen complaints from people that said, "It took 3 hours for the nurse to get here after they died." And it's like, okay, so I want people to understand that it's not an emergency.
Yeah.
Uh, Sometimes it takes a while because we're seeing people who are still alive. Um,
Right?
and this is your last opportunity to be with your person in your
That's
home.
true.
You will
That's true.
never be with them in this environment again. Even if you
Yeah.
have them embalmed, it's not going to be the same.
Yeah.
You were just with them, you saw them through to the end.
Right.
Take a breath, relax, enjoy this time, be with them,
That's
try
nice
to.
perspective. Yeah, I like that a lot. Because families always feel that it's a rush, it's a rush, and I understand that too. At the same time, because if your loved one is passed away at in their home, it would be like, okay, like we have had their time, but if you could spin it and say this is your last opportunity, I think that gives people a little bit more of a leeway. And when I love what you said, Penny, like we're dealing with other patients and other families and things like that, like everything is not instantaneous, and even though people come to expect that level, you know it's hard for us because we're dealing with so many different things at all times, both hospice and funeral directors. So I do like that perspective a lot for a family member.
I think people worry too about the body decomposing. Like they're
Yeah.
afraid they're going to start
Yeah,
decomposing right away. And,
right
you
in front
know,
of you.
I remember we had someone in the care center for 24 hours once, and we just turned the air conditioner on and cooled the room down. It was
Yeah,
not a big deal at
anything
all.
helps. Yeah, yeah, I'm with you. That's great. Well, Penny, this has been awesome. I'd love to tell you about, or tell our audience what you have going on now. I know you're about to release a book, so please give us the rundown on that, and then we'll plug your socials too. It's Hospice Nurse Penny. So if you don't follow her absolutely. And let's hear about your book too.
Right. I'm on all the socials, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. I also have a podcast called Death Happens, An Insider's Guide to Dying.
Great.
That's found on all the pods. And my book is called Influencing Death, Reframing Dying for Better Living. It's actually a memoir, but it's educational also. It talks about my journey in life, and how I became a hospice nurse, how dealing with death impacted my life. And there's lots of great stories in it. And it will be available for pre-order sometime end of October or beginning of November. I have a website, hospicenursepenny.com, and people can sign up on my mailing list on there. I don't send out newsletters, so I'm not going to spam anybody, but I will announce when my book is available for
Great.
pre-sale.
Well, everyone should go out and get it so you can get the full story and learn some more. But thank you so much, Penny. This has been a blast and very knowledgeable, I think, for anyone in the death care industry. We learned a lot from you, and just your experience is really beautiful, and love your perspective on how you're trying to make a difference in helping families and just giving them more perspective every day.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.